A bad guy is ready for battle. Here to look at the Mattel Master Universe Origins Battle Armor Skeletor. This 5.5-inch Skeletor battle figure has 16 movable joints for action scenes and power posing. The figure comes with extra accessories and a special swappable head. Figure also wears battle armor that spins to show when he sustained damage in combat. Suppose before we get down to the review of Battle Armor Skeletor, the first thing we're going to probably want to do is figure out how tall the figure stands. Now, the description of this figure lists it as being 5.5 inches in height. It's going to be a little bit taller than that, simply just because I got the legs straight right now. If you want to have it more in that vintage pose, which I'll show you in a second, just involves you really just bending the legs. Does that make sense? I hope so. Taking it, though, nonetheless, right to the very top of his hooded head, stopping right there. The figure stands 5.8, had to wait for it to focus, 5.8 inches in height. Switching that to centimeters, revealing that Battle Armor Skeletor is almost 15 centimeters, 14.9 to be exact. I suppose it may be in your best interest to see some size comparisons, so happy to oblige. Let's bring in the original Skeletor that we had a look at. Not really much changes here. We can also bring in the Battle Armor He-Man that we just recently had a look at. Pardon my area. Give you a good idea of how the characters stack up with one another. Again, not really much different here. A lot of the same molds get carried over from one figure to the other, although you wouldn't be able to say that Skeletor is using the same body elements as He-Man. His forearms are different, as well as his feet. But when it comes to comparing Skeletor to Skeletor, apples to apples, evil, nasty apples, the kind of apples you really don't want to be eating, those crab apples that grow, the park trees, you always see them and you're like, hey, I feel like an apple. You don't want to eat those nasty apples. But apples for apples, apples to apples, these Skeletors aren't that much different from one another, short of, again, just the change in the torso and brand new head sculpt here on Battle Armor's version. And that story, by the way, about the park apples, I speak from personal experience of being a small child walking through a park, finding one of those apple trees and expecting a sweet fruit to be pulled from its branches. A park small crab apple, if you will, is far from being sweet. You'll only have one of them and realize the error of your ways. With that being said, let's get a closer look at Skeletor's accessories. He comes included with the same comic that we got with Battle Armor He-Man. Nothing seems different here. And again, I noticed, flipping through the pages, there's not a single description, read-up, dialogue, or anything. It's just left to only just you, the viewing audience, to gauge what's going on by what you're reading in the comics, or what you're not necessarily reading from comics. From what I'm understanding, it seems to be like some horde droids are coming to the castle. I don't know. The king seems okay by everything. Also, I noticed here that in the comic, there's Clamp Champ right there. Initially, I may have suspected that this comic was only going to be for Battle Armor He-Man and Battle Armor Skeletor, but considering that Clamp Champ is on the back of the packaging, I may suspect that this comic may come include with him as well. Other than that, I mean, like there's Ram Man, so maybe Ram Man may get this comic also. But there's only a lot of times when he comes with these wave comics, they're always exclusive to certain characters. Clamp Champ, Ram Man, Battle Armor He-Man, and Skeletor, respectively. But again, like, there's no read-up. I don't know why they left everything off. And then also featured on the back here is the other characters from this particular wave. Clamp Champ I have not seen anywhere. I've seen other figures being advertised, people picking them up. Clamp Champ, not so much. With that being said, how many more times am I going to say Clamp Champ? Clamp Champ. Let's have a look at the other accessories that come included with one Skeletor. One thing that's neat, as an exclusive to this, is he comes included with a shield. I don't believe the original Skeletor came included with a shield. It came with a Havoc Staff, check. Came with the Power Sword, check. Didn't come with a sinister-looking shield like this, and I'm really kind of digging this. I like the design of this. It doesn't have any paint, mind you, to it. But I do think that that's a pretty fierce-looking skeleton on the outside of the shield. Almost has like a bit of a glitter effect done to it as well. You can flip it around, and the shield clamps onto the side of Skeletor's arm. Not the easiest, mind you. If you pick up the figure, I suppose you could technically do it on either side. I like to put the shield on this side, but I find it's always difficult to kind of get the hand in there. First of all, the fingers are way too wide. And then you have to fit it in such small, cramped quarters. Just get it in there. And then you have to kind of get the clamp around the sides of his thinned arms. So he's got it on both sides here. It kind of gets in there. I find it actually helps just to twist the arm slightly. And it gets sort of just around there. But it almost seems like it's not designed specifically for this arm. As again, quickly as you get the one fingers in place, just like that, you then have to, again, contend with these little fins on the sides of Skeletor's arms. Could they not have maybe moved the clamp a little bit higher up? I've also tried twisting the arm to see if that kind of fixes the problem. And it kind of does a better job. But again, like, you're going to be struggling getting the fingers around there and then also clamping it in place. A lot of times what I just end up doing is just clamping it further up his arm, calling it a day. Not that I would be calling it a day, because of course we have to go through the rest of this review. But like I said, it just barely holds in place. At the beginning of this review, I seem to have a better job of getting it in place. Maybe I'm just not doing it well enough here. Of course, when the cameras are rolling, it's a lot more difficult to pull off such feats. It would have certainly made things a lot easier if his fingers weren't as wide as they were. Just get them in there. You kind of have to even squeeze the fingers just a little bit to get them in there. I don't want to spend this entire review. That would really suck. There we go. There we go. Whoosh. Didn't want to spend this entire review trying to force a shield into Skeletor's hands. But like you said, there's the shield right there. Looks good. A little bit more difficult to get onto his arm. They probably should have moved the clamp a little bit further up. Anyways, whoosh, move that to the side. Skeletor also comes included. Let's put the figure down here for a second. Never speak of the shield again. I'm sure we'll speak of the shield a little bit later. He comes also included with the power sword. Now, this is the same halved power sword as we got with the other Skeletor. So what you can do is reach off to the side. Not that you have to reach off to the side, but I'll reach off to the side, grab the halved sword that came included with Power Armor He-Man. And like we did with the Skeletor and He-Man figures, you're just going to clamp those together and you got yourself a power sword. What I would have suggested as a possible idea, and I said this with the Battle Armor He-Man review, is if they had taken the molds and inverted the colors. So if Skeletor's here is purple, but if they changed the color to silver, if they had taken He-Man's sword and colored or molded it in the purple plastic, so basically they were the inverted versions of what you're seeing right now, you could then, in theory, take the He-Man power sword, and you can clamp them together, and you would still get yourself a full He-Man power sword. You could still do that with Skeletor, and then providing you have both sets of figures, you could then still do the half and half treatment. I just feel like that's a simple enough solution to the problem of not having a full sword with either one of the figures. Anyways, let's go ahead and just pry these away from one another. There we go. Pop that off, and we'll put He-Man's sword to the side for the time being. By the way, in case you are curious, you can spin Skeletor around to the back. A little area there, like He-Man, on the back of his torso that houses the power sword. So if you want to do the half sword somewhere else other than in Skeletor's hands, you can do that. Just slide that into the back. Skeletor also comes included with the exact same same exact Havoc staff, moving away from power. Same exact Havoc staff that came included with the other Skeletor as well. Doesn't seem like anything has changed. No different molding or different use of plastic. It's the exact same Havoc staff that we had seen before. And I'm fine for that. I think probably in this case, while I would be displaying my other Skeletor, I feel, with the Havoc staff, I may probably end up displaying this one with the half sword and with the shield. Just because it's different. Mixes it up a little bit. It's nice to have variety. Speaking of variety, Skeletor does have a other swappable hand. So if you want to be completely dismissing this flat hand and find yourself a better solution to have him holding the shield, just pop the hand off, replace it with this hand instead. Go back to the shield I never really thought I would be talking about anymore. It still gives you an issue where you're having to get it around the fin. Oh boy, let's not spend again the rest of this review talking about this. But again, you can also use that as an option as well. Just struggle. I struggle a little bit. Let's talk about the things I really do like about this particular figure. One of which being the head sculpt. You get a brand new head sculpt here with Skeletor. Technically, you did get a brand new head sculpt with He-Man. Although I still really wasn't a big fan of that one. One thing that's neat about this is kind of like the He-Man had a vintage head sculpt. Skeletor kind of gets a makeshift vintage head sculpt as well. This one, you'll see, has a big giant smile on his face. The other one, not so happy. He's got a frown. Turn that frown upside down, Mr. Skeletor. I do like the option available with that, because if we put this figure down here for a second, you probably already see where I'm going to be going with this, grabbing the Skeletor that we looked at before. You remember the original Skeletor had the yelling expression, or he's definitely angry about something. If you weren't so much a big fan of this particular head, then you can go this head sculpt instead, which I might find myself possibly permanently doing as my long-term option for displaying these figures. You can go ahead and just replace the head sculpt, pop that in place, and you get this head sculpt instead. It seems to be a little bit more of a struggle, there we go, to get the head properly in place. But you know what? I tell you, I like that head sculpt a lot more than I liked this one right here. I mean, this one was okay, but I think this one looks a lot better. Drastically better, dare I say. What's gone, of course, here is the green. The green is now completely left off instead, just for a more familiar-looking Skeletor face. But definitely, I feel like this is going to be what I'm going to be doing instead when it comes to this display of the original Skeletor. And when you have the two side to side, there's still enough difference from one to the other. The frowned Skeletor head sculpt, for example, has the airbrushing of the green. Like I said, for the most part, generally left off this one. There's a little bit of green along the top area there, and the areas around his cheeks as well. But it's certainly not the stark outlining of green that the original Skeletor had. I love the fact that you do get options like this. Now, would this head sculpt find its way to this body? Possibly not. I kind of like this one having it on the original Skeletor. I really like that. Putting that to the side, looking at all the other accessories we've already looked at, we just moved those out of the way. Let's get a closer look at Skeletor. Now we'll go ahead and slide his sword from the back of his torso. Essentially, we're getting, again, the same Skeletor body, with the arms, with the legs, with the furry underoos, and the lower feet, with the webbed toes. The only thing, of course, drastically changed here is the torso piece, similar to that of He-Man's. Speaking of He-Man, I suppose it would probably make some sense if we're talking about battle armor versions. Let's bring in the other He-Man so you can see the difference between the two. One thing I like about them is that the figures are a throwback to the original vintage line from the 80s. It's very much something I would expect to see on the original battle armor varieties of Skeletor and He-Man. Something always for me about this particular logo of Skeletor and Battle Armor Skeletor always reminded me of the original Bat roller coaster at Canada's Wonderland. People in Canada would recognize that name. People outside of Canada may not even know what I'm talking about. But that always reminded me of the old Bat logo from that roller coaster. The gimmick still applies here for Skeletor, where you have yourself a spinning disc, and essentially it sits on a clip, and behind that is a spring. When it recesses itself, it then flips to itself, flips around, and latches then on the next available point. So what you then get is 3 different ways to display the figure. Let's go ahead and take Skeletor's Havoc Staff. I'm just going to use the ball jointed end of it. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to flick it against his torso, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Tap it once, and you'll see one single slash find its way across Skeletor's torso. We can do the exact same thing, rinse and repeat, do it a second time, and you've now got yourself a secondary slash. It doesn't show as well on He-Man, but I gotta say, when you've got the majority of the torso being this purple and the outline of the green in the bat, that silver sure stands out. I mean, you can see that carved across his torso. To replace it back, all you have to do is just take your thumb. It doesn't have to necessarily be your thumb, but you're going to push it in slightly, and you're going to roll it around. Roll it around until you get to the main one, and then you're basically just going to let it go. What it's doing is, while you're pushing that in, rotating it, once you release it, it latches here on the side. There's like little tab points on either side of it. And the exact same thing again. We're just going to push it in, rotate it again, until finally we have an undamaged Skeletor torso. Mind you, we're looking all this time at the gimmick and spent very little time discussing the sculpting of the torso. I've really loved the skeleton motif down below, very much akin to the original Skeletor that we got before. The sculpting, though, of that black plastic outlining the frame of where he gets damaged really does look great on this figure and differentiates it quite a lot from that original Skeletor that we looked at before. Spin the figure around again. You've got the little holstered section on the back that can house the power sword, or half that power sword. In case you are curious, can you take the Havoc Staff, fit it in place? No, you can't. The ball joint is just way too big. Just doesn't fit into that allotted slot there. But like I said, the rest of Skeletor's body doesn't really change. A lot of it really stays the same. By far my favorite thing about this figure, well, that's not true. There's lots of things I really like about this figure. One thing I really do like is that head sculpt. Unfortunately, there is a little bit where it seems like the black hasn't completely... Well, it looks like it's almost overlapped itself, but you could say it's technically just chalked up to a gap in Skeletor's teeth. Yeah, okay, we'll run with that. The airbrushing is really quite nice on this. Like the shield as well, it seems like his hood has a little bit of a glitter effect added to it. I'm sure it's probably just the plastic that they ended up using. Looking at the head sculpt, the only thing I would really critique it on in a negative way is that the eyes do come across a little speckly. They're not the sharpest. I'm not really sure why. He-Man's eyes were really problematic as well, if you remember his eyeliner. Yeah, that was ridiculous. Skeletor's is a better looking head sculpt of the two. Just kind of wish that the eyes were a little bit sharper than what they were. Looking at the figure's articulation, Skeletor's head rotates all the way around. It hinges down, it hinges up, and of course you can kind of rock it back and forth. There's not a lot of clearance there. The arms can bring out at a full 90-degree angle bend. Sorry, what? Yes, on both sides. Yeah, you can do it on both sides. I know sometimes I always really target one area, but you can actually do it on both sides. The arms rotate all the way around. He doesn't have a swivel necessarily in the bicep, but he does have a swivel in his elbow, and that so happens to also be the same place where he has a hinge joint also. Hand rotates all the way around, hinges back and forth. Then when it comes to his upper torso, get his arm just bent back there. The only downside I would say about Skeletor, and I guess really all the figures are problematic for this, is the allotment of the gap for his hinge. Because the hinge joint, and because his torso is so broad, a lot of times they're always really going to be walking around like muscle men. But I guess that's really how the original vintage line was all about anyways. Skeletor's waist can rotate all the way around. You can bring his legs out, almost like full splits. There's a ball joint right there. Forward and back on the legs. Does have to bend at the knee. You can also rotate the legs forward and back this way. In Skeletor's case, you can also rotate his foot all the way around, the boots, the sculpted boot there. You can also bring the feet back and forth this way, and you can also rock it also this way as well. Something I mentioned at the beginning of this review, I believe the figure was about 5.8 inches, but usually they're described as 5.5 inches. That's because you can also bring the legs forward. I didn't do this with He-Man, but I figured by now you guys already know what I was talking about. You can bend the knees. Just bend the feet up a little bit. And if you want to, again, it's crazy that they would use this as a marketing strategy, but if you bent the knees, and you also bent, of course, the feet to compensate for that, you can kind of get Skeletor in his vintage squatting pose, similar to what the original Battle Armor Skeletor looked like. Again, for comparisons, even though it's technically a little smaller of a figure now, we can bring in the original Skeletor with a brand new head sculpt now. Let's just move him over here. Bring in the brand new Skeletor with a brand new head sculpt. Yeah, I gotta admit, that head sculpt is looking a lot better on the original Skeletor. I don't know necessarily what I'll do with this one. Now I almost kind of feel like I want to buy another Skeletor so I can have one looking like this, one with what I feel now is a superior head sculpt, and then have Battle Armor Skeletor all on display, because I feel like you really can't have enough Skeletors. Even though Battle Armor Skeletor wasn't gifted that same energy effect that the Battle Armor He-Man came included with, I felt he got a better looking accessory traded up instead, that neat Battle Shield. Granted, the Battle Shield doesn't clamp onto Skeletor's arm very well at all, because you already saw me struggle a little longer than it needed to struggle in this review, at me trying to get that blasted shield attached to his arms, and the culprit is really those fins. They serve fine as a regular sculpted arm for Skeletor, but you try to attach a shield to it, you really have to kind of navigate around those little flaps of plastic to get him to properly hold it right. Oh well, at least he comes with a neat looking shield. And probably when it comes time to displaying this particular figure, just to differ things up a little bit from my other display of Skeletor, this one is going to be displayed with the shield difficultly, and he's going to be displayed with the half power sword. You know, speaking of the power sword, again, I want to mention this. I know I said it already in this review, and sometimes I do repeat myself frequently, a little more than I want to. But again, with the power sword, why didn't they just invert the molds? In other words, why didn't they take Skeletor's mold it in the silver plastic, and then take He-Man's power sword and mold it in purple plastic? Because what you'd be able to then pull off is putting the two halves of Skeletor's two swords together and get a full purple power sword. You could do the exact same thing with He-Man. If you had the Battle Armor He-Man and the regular He-Man, you could take those two halves of the swords, put them together, and you'd have a full sword. Why didn't they do that? I don't know. But needless to say, though, I'm glad that at least with this one, he gets extra accessories to warrant, again, the fact that these are deluxe released figures with deluxe released prices. These figures are going to be a little bit more expensive than the standard release figures that we've been looking at up to this point. But at least they throw other things in there, like different head sculpts, brand new accessories, and the fact of a working gimmick. I love the fact that these actually have a working gimmick similar to the one that we had in the 80s. It worked and cool. It was cool back then. It's just as cool now to be as an adult, picking up these figures and being able to flick Skeletor's chest and revealing battle damage ×2. And of course, let's not talk about, let's talk about his alternate head sculpt. A much better head sculpt than that original Skeletor that we got before. Definitely going to be the head sculpt I'm going to use further moving forward, displaying that Skeletor on my shelf. The open mouth was okay for when it was first released, but now seeing how much better it looks with the alternate head sculpt, definitely going to be using that alternate head sculpt that came included with this Skeletor, and having this one with the frowny face. Oh, he's so sad. He's sad because he's got half a sword and the shield just doesn't want to clamp onto his hand, but half sad face for Skeletor, and a happier smiling Skeletor face for that other one I'm going to be putting on display. Fine job on Skeletor here. He does have some difficulties, more so with his accessories, but the figure really does deliver exactly what I would want an updated battle armor Skeletor to actually be. What do you guys think of these figures? Let me know down below in the comments section, even if you had owned the original Battle Armor He-Man and Battle Armor Skeletor when you were first growing up. Also, if you're new to this channel and enjoying all the content you're seeing and digging still the fact that we're looking through all the Master of the Universe Origins figures, we're going to keep doing this because I'm loving this line so far. Make sure, though, you hit the subscribe button down below and make sure, yes, you turn on the bell notification. And make sure, yes, you come back to this channel on a regular basis. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we always got new videos popping up. Most of the time, they're usually 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure you mark that on your calendar to know when you can come back to this channel, join in on us with several different premieres that we do. There's lots of brisks, lots of snacks. There's always new stuff going on, coming on this channel. So keep your peepers peeled and lots of stuff coming your way. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.